Madam Tine Ramstad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Dear ladies and gentlemen, displacement by disasters is a life-changing and devastating event for millions of people around the world every year. Over the last 5 years, an estimated 144 million people have been displaced by rapid onset disasters, 32.4 million last year alone. The figures is just the tip of the iceberg and would be far higher if drought and slow onset disasters were taken into account. The amount of people displaced is currently unknown, highlighting blind spots in our knowledge. Thanks to early warning and life-saving measures, the number of people dying as a result of disasters has declined over the past 3 decades. At the same time, a growing number of people are living in hazard-prone areas, such as flood-prone riverbanks or in areas vulnerable to coastal degradation. More and more people are therefore at the risk of being displaced, particularly those associated with climate and weather-related events. As the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has noted, projected increases in the frequency and intensity of such events is likely to be a further driver of displacement in the future. Immediate and coordinated actions is needed to better prevent and prepare for disaster-related displacement, and to help those displaced by disaster to rebuild their homes and livelihoods. Recurrent patterns of disaster-induced displacement have a cumulative impact on the vulnerability of affected populations in many countries. For example, the Norwegian Refugee Council has witnessed this in assisting people who are repeatedly displaced by floods in Pakistan. In such cases, returning displaced people home without further reducing the disaster risks is like treating the symptoms without addressing the core problem. Governments and other stakeholders who participated in the UNISDR post-2015 consultation process consistently called for inclusion of disaster reduction and climate risks in the post-2015 development agenda. Given the current trends, the resilience of the most vulnerable men, women, and children throughout the world must be strengthened to avoid negative cumulative impacts on vulnerabilities associated with recurrent displacement, both by small and large-scale disasters. The chair's summary from the Global Platform in 2011 indicated that a critical next step was to account for disaster losses in a standardized manner to support multi-hazard integrated assessments for decision-making and transparency. During the post-2015 consultative process, several governments have repeated this call. And the Norwegian Refugee Council wholeheartedly supports these requests. The systematic recording of disaster impacts has been rapidly expanding, giving governments and humanitarians a better understanding of how people's homes and livelihoods are at the risk of further disasters. For example, the number of national disaster loss databases have more than doubled over the last decade. The increases in available disaster information at the national and local level has led to some of the biggest gains in DRR since the Hyogo Framework of Action was adopted in 2005. There are still blind spots when it comes to disaster-induced displacement and data. To address this, two things are needed. First, we need a standardized and robust methods for recording disaster-induced displacement, and it must be agreed upon and incorporated into existing disaster loss databases. And two, more countries are needed to invest in the collection, storage, sharing, and analysis of this data. NRC is committed to contribute evidence and capacity reduce disaster risk, with particular attention on issues of concern to people displaced or at the risk of displacement by disasters. We will continue to provide independent global evidence, analysis, and expert personnel through a roster on DRR risk management specialists available for deployment in support of national authorities and UN country teams. The Norwegian Refugee Council and its Internal Displacement Monitoring Center urges governments to take the necessary steps to halt and reverse the trends of increasing disaster-induced displacement. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Ramstad.